his case for the U.S. going to war against Iraq yesterday?
No way, because I don't think there's anything brand new. He brought a lot of things together, and there was a lot of, I think, innuendo and what-ifs. But no, war is a very serious thing, and I think that a country has to be aggressed against. If Iraq had committed aggression against us, or was on the verge of doing it, I think all Americans would be for it. But now there's a major debate going on because there's been no aggression, and there's no true connection to the Al-Qaeda. One or two Al-Qaeda members being in Iraq is hardly saying that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. It just isn't true. Matter of fact, Saddam Hussein provides a great resistance to the Al-Qaeda because they are enemies of Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is very religious, and Hussein is not. So what we're doing is literally disturbing a country that resists the likes of Osama bin Laden. And if there is a disruption, although we will occupy Iraq, after the war, and we will control the oil, I mean, there's going to be a lot of mischief over there, and there's going to be division, and I think there's going to be a lot of agitation. Osama bin Laden sees this as an opportunity to move his people into power because he has a lot of sympathizers there. But one sympathizer is not Saddam Hussein.
We'd like to get your questions and comments for Representative Paul. The lines are there on the screen. If you agree with President Bush, call us at 202-585-3880. And if you disagree with President Bush, 202-585-3881. Yesterday, you called for the repeal of the authorization to use military force. Why did you do that?
Because I think it was unconstitutional for the Congress to transfer the war power to the president. And now we hear the president say, I haven't decided to go to war yet. He hasn't made a decision. But in a republic and in our tradition here in this country, war was meant to be a prerogative of the Congress. And yet the Congress delivered that authority to the president. We didn't declare war. I asked them in the International Relations Committee that if you want war, declare war and fight it and win it and get it over with. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to transfer this authority to the president, which you can with a constitutional amendment. But we did that by legislation. We didn't declare war, but we delivered this authority to the president, and that is one of the major reasons we fought our revolution, to get the war powers away from the king, away from the executive branch, and delivered to the legislative branch, which is closest to the people. So it's the Congress that should declare war, not the president.
And at this point, should the Congress declare war?
No, I don't think so. But I think that the reason I introduced the resolution was to make the point that if they want war, they should be responsible for it and make that decision. But the Congress ducked their responsibility by saying, let the president decide. He's the commander-in-chief. He's the commander-in-chief after we make a decision that a war should be fought. But no, I mean, the necessity of this war doesn't exist. There's nobody to fight. Really, when you consider the GDP of Iraq, it's the size of Idaho. And they don't have a Navy. They don't have an Air Force. We've been bombing them for 12 years, and they shoot at us all the time. 40,000 sorties over Iraq. They haven't hit one airplane yet. So it's what's there to invade? I mean, yes, there are going to be a lot of innocent people killed and maybe a lot of Americans killed, and they have pushed this rattlesnake into a pit, but somebody's going to get bit, and it could be us. But the fighting the war and winning the war isn't a big problem. What is the real problem is what happens afterwards. Has there been one minute of discussion about what happens afterwards? Who occupies? How long will we occupy? Who gets the oil? We're so anxious to accuse France for wanting to worry about their contracts that they have with Iraq. But the whole issue here is we, the United States, will be controlling the contracts, and if France doesn't toe the line, they're going to be excluded. So my suspicion is that France will come along too, because this has a lot to do with commercial interests. Most wars do. They have to do with commercial interests.
Napa, California, good morning. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen, and I want to thank you for your time on this important issue. The senator there has said the things that I'd been thinking all along. I don't feel that war with Iraq right now is the thing to do. As I watched Colin Powell present the evidence, I was concerned because I'm sure the enemy would be aware that we would be monitoring all methods of communication, and it's an old tactic that, of course, America has used to provide false information. And I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that you need to look at the whole thing. And those pictures, I looked at those. I was in air cargo in the Air Force, and it's not unusual to have those type of equipment to me in those areas. Although I could see what Mr. Powell was saying. However, the war with Iraq, to me, I think is going to bring more problems for us down the line. I think it's going to create more hate toward America. I'm guessing here. I think it could create problems that we don't have right now. I don't believe they've been giving weapons or things to the terrorists. However, this might push them into it. There's many, many other countries who have the same weapons and even worse than they do. And I don't know that they are supplying the terrorists, but they could be. So that argument, I don't think, weighs in too well there.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It seems to me that right now we're looking for the justification. The decision was made many months ago to go to war. Now we're trying to find the reason to go to war. And even though the justification was greater during the Persian Gulf War I, they really had to use a lot of propaganda to get the American people riled up to go to war. And as I recall, they talked about 500,000 troops on the border of Saudi Arabia ready to invade. That turned out not to be true. And the stories about babies being torn from incubators, that turned out to be not true. So even with more justification, there needed to be a lot of propaganda. So that's what we're going through now, trying to get the people to agree with a war that has already been decided upon.
York, Pennsylvania, you disagree with the president?
No, I don't disagree.
I'm sorry, you agree. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree, and the main reason to be is post 9/11. Beforehand, everyone said, well, the dots were there, nobody connected them. What I want to know is when a biological attack does happen in the United States, okay, everyone's going to turn around and point their fingers and say, well, why didn't we connect the dots? Why didn't President Bush do something? I was over when they had the hostages in Iran. I spent 9.5 months off the coast over there on an aircraft carrier, USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, and I think that the problem should have been taken care of back then in Iran, and the example should have been sent back then, okay? And we wouldn't be where we are today. They should have done it with Iran, and now it's got to be done with Iraq. And I'm sure that when we're done with Iraq, we're going to have to give the people the chance in Iran to do the same thing and rectify the problem, because they're just another force to be reckoned with too. It's got to, it's got to end. Someone's got to end it. And we could all sit back here and say, oh, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But I'll guarantee you, all the people up there in the Congress and all the senators, when it happens here, their tune's going to change real quick. Okay, and their voting record's going to be thrown out there. So they better think long and hard. Are they willing to put the American people at risk? Are they willing to deal with it and do what they've done, and my father and my grandfather and everyone else is willing to do? When people join the military, they're willing to put their lives on the line for the greater good of the people, just like I was. And I feel for the boys that are getting ready to go over there. And if they lose their lives, I feel for them. 7 astronauts died. They made a big to-do over it, okay? Just the other week, 4 people in Afghanistan died on a helicopter crash, and it barely made a ripple in the water. I think we need to get our priorities right.
Yeah, and I think if we follow your advice, as soon as we're done with Iraq, we go to Korea. And then where else? So that's what it leads to. And you're correct about the Al-Qaeda and the threat of nuclear and biological and chemical attacks on this country. But those of us who oppose this war oppose it for that reason, because we think you're going to increase the chances of it. And the Al-Qaeda should be looked at. But have you noticed that Osama bin Laden is not talked about anymore? But you have to remember, if you're concerned about that, you have to realize is that Saddam Hussein was not responsible for that. You should be looking for the al-Qaeda. You should be looking for Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden, most likely right now, is in Pakistan. And they're our ally, and we give them a lot of money. Pakistan is a dictatorship, a military dictatorship that was that threw out an elected government, and yet they're our best pals right now. And yet we're dealing with Iraq at the time when we should be dealing with the al-Qaeda.
Columbus, Georgia, you disagree with the president. Why is that?
Yes, good morning. How are you? I think I agree with the senator there. I think if truth be told, if Saddam Hussein were to say today to the West, to the EU, to America, I'm ready to open up my country to free market capitalism, they would all of a sudden be our friend, just as China, who has opened up its country more to capitalism, has become now a strategic partner. If Iran were to say that, if North Korea were to say, we're ready to open up our markets to you guys, they would no longer be this evil axis. And Saddam Hussein could have death rays from Mars that he could hit us with, and we would not care. It's all about countries who are closed off to free market capitalism. And if you look at it, the three axes in the evil axis are countries whose markets are closed off to free market capitalism. If Saddam Hussein were smart, he'd say to the EU, I want you guys to come on in here and set up McDonald's on every corner and Exxon and BP and all these places. And if you stop America from attacking me and changing my regime, I'll give it all to you. I bet you not one EU country would vote to go to war.
You know, I think that is just great advice, and that's the position I take, that if you want to spread our system of government, you know, freedom and free markets, we should do it by example. We shouldn't do it by force of arms. It totally failed in Vietnam, but when we lost the war and got out, they became capitalistic. We've been in Korea for 50 years, and yet that problem has not been solved. So I would say free markets and trade with people. We have done better with China since we took the bold step of trading with China. They have become more capitalistic, and that's what we should be doing. We used to trade with Iraq and Iran, and if we would have continued instead of always using sanctions and punishing the people, the sanctions on Iraq in these last 12 years has not hurt Saddam Hussein. He has been enhanced in his country. He's more powerful within his own country than before, but the people suffer. Hundreds of thousands of people die from those sanctions. So I would say, yes, that's spread. It's too bad Hussein doesn't have a little more common sense and say open markets are better. But the best way for us to get that message out is to practice what we preach and not try to deliver our message with guns.